Drew Gulak leaves WWE. A WWE Hall of Famer says Sting will end up in AEW. And Brodie Lee and Jon Moxley have some things to say about WWE, and we talk about it all next on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. This is Ralph Valenti. For news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. So late Saturday night, we got the news, Ralph, that Drew Gulak is leaving WWE. However, the original report from Pro Wrestling Sheet said that he was released, but PW Insider says his contract is up and they did not renew the contract. They could not agree to terms. So, Ralph, first, this seems shocking to me. So what are your thoughts initially of the news that Gulak's leaving WWE?
I find it surprising for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, he was kind of used in a pretty prominent role before his departure from WWE. Yep. He was in the storyline involving Daniel Bryan. More or less, they were working together to try and make Daniel Bryan better. They became a tag team, if you want to consider it a tag team. Mm-hmm. But he was, one of the main characters involved in one of the bigger storylines in WWE on SmackDown right now. So I find that surprising. The other thing that I find surprising is the fact that this is a little bit different in comparison to what the WWE has done with guys that don't necessarily agree to terms with their contracts. So knowing that he hadn't re-signed at the time, putting him into a main storyline, I find that a little surprising considering usually if they know you're not going to re-sign, I mean, look what they did with the Revival, look what they've done with guys in the past. They typically won't keep you on TV. They did the same thing with Rusev, or they put you in a storyline where they're going to bury you. That way, if you do choose to go to another promotion, at least you're leaving the company on the not necessarily in the best
terms.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, I think that because they were pushing him so well, it's just a matter of the terms aren't quite there yet, but they're probably closer than people think. So it's just the contract ran out, and we probably have not seen the last of Drew Gulak in WWE, although a lot of people on Twitter, when the first report came out that he was released, a lot of people were angered by that. Like, how could WWE let this guy go? He's getting pushed so well. And then you get, of course, the people saying Drew Gulak to AEW. Get him to AEW because he'd be a great asset, especially with all the other cruiserweights in AEW with the likes of Darby Allin and Sammy Guevara. And the fact that in his independent circuit days, Drew Gulak was in a faction with Chucky T and Orange Cassidy called the Gentleman's Club. So maybe they add him to the Best Friends faction. But I don't think this ends with Drew Gulak leaving WWE and going somewhere else. I actually end up seeing him going back to WWE, let the terms finalize, and this story with him and Daniel Bryan is just not over yet. I think we don't see him until after Daniel Bryan wins the Intercontinental Championship and the Intercontinental Championship tournament. And then Gulak comes back, attacks him, saying, you know what, I know everything about you. And that leads to a match at SummerSlam for the Intercontinental Championship. That's where I think that's going.
Yeah, I can't see him going to AEW or elsewhere right now. I mean, WWE has invested quite a bit of time and effort into creating the storyline surrounding himself and Daniel Bryan. So I think that, eventually both sides will end up meeting in the middle, or they'll both be satisfied and they'll get him re-signed.
Right. All right. So another guy that's been rumored to have his contract up with WWE and being connected to AEW is Sting. So his contract is up with WWE. He had a Legends contract, so he can go wherever he wants, whether that's as a producer, as a legend, as a writer, or even an in-ring wrestler, whatever he wants to do. Nothing's been confirmed yet. However, WWE Hall of Famer Booker T says that he thinks he will have a run in All Elite Wrestling, saying anything can happen in this business. These old guys, man, always feel like they want to jump. They always feel like they got something left in the tank, always feel like they got one last run in them. I would not doubt for 1 minute that we see Sting back inside the squared circle against Darby Allin. Sting versus Darby, you know what I mean? So what do you think? Do we see Sting in AEW?
I do think he's going to go there based on some of the stuff that we've seen. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Sting is not WWE talent. When people think of Sting, I think they probably think of WCW first, and then they probably think of his run in TNA.
Right.
Unfortunately for him, when he did go to the WWE, he was well past his prime then. He ended up getting hurt, so even that was cut short. I think the one thing that people were hopeful for was ultimately a match or some type of interaction between Sting and The Undertaker.
Right.
I think that given the circumstances surrounding the time that he had in WWE, he still kind of has something that he maybe wants to prove to himself. I don't think he needs to prove anything to the fans. I don't think he needs to prove anything to anybody else within the industry because he's certainly accomplished a lot. But, like Booker T kind of points out, in professional wrestling, you get these guys who, using Ric Flair as an example, they say they're done because they've worked in WWE and they've accomplished so much, but eventually they come back, even if it's for one match. Bret Hart came back in the WWE for that one match, so I wouldn't put it past Sting to go to AEW and perform the match. The thing is, at what capacity? Do I want to see him in a singles run in a legitimate, going against one of the top tier guys? No. If it's in a tag team setting or multiple individuals involved in the match, I could see that. The thing that they have to be careful of is the more older guys they bring into AEW, the more it kind of looks a little more like TNA. And you're taking away from the good young, a spot away from the good young talent that they have there. And they do have a lot of it. Even Undertaker commented on this in the documentary, The Last Ride. He understood when he goes and performs at WrestleMania, he knows that he's taking a spot away from a young talent that's could be performing. Now, if Sting goes to AEW, whether it's a small role or a larger role, you got to think that because of the name itself, Sting, he's not going to perform on like an undercard. He's going to be in one of the main events. He's taking that match away from a younger guy.
Right. And especially where AEW, if he goes to AEW, their focus right now is to build the young stars, the unknowns, the Darby Allins, the Sammy Guevaras, the Orange Cassidys, the Trent Berettas that not many people know. But, you get those people right now that are saying all AEW is doing instead is signing the former WWE guys and giving them pushes. That's why Moxley has the title. Jericho was the first champion. Cody had the first big
Brodie Lee is challenging for the title.
Yeah, Brodie Lee is challenging for the title. So, you get some fans that are like, this is not what we were told. And if they bring Sting in, it's another argument for them to say, well, they're just signing the former guys and not pushing the unknown guys.
Right.
However, Booker T saying, you know what? Get Sting in a program with Darby Allin. And that's how you're supposed to build these unknown guys. You don't put them with another unknown. We don't want a match of Darby Allin against Sammy Guevara on the first episode of Dynamite. As an example, we need Cody Rhodes against Sammy Guevara because we know Cody Rhodes. Then you get people to know Sammy Guevara. That's how you build the stars. So if you have Sting go against Darby Allin, people that watch for Sting now know who Darby Allin is and they stay for Darby Allin. That's how that works. So when people say, oh, they're just pushing the WWE guys. Yes, but there's a reason they're doing it. They're doing it because they have to push those guys because they know them so that when the unknown guy beats them, you stay for the unknown guy.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
As it pertains to Sting, in a feud with Darby Allin, I'd like to see Darby Allin continue to win matches, work his way back to a match with Cody, and ultimately beat Cody at a big main event or in a big match in a big main event feel. I think that would do more for his career than, having a match and beating a guy like Sting, especially because, like we talked about, Sting is certainly past his prime. He hasn't wrestled in quite some time now. He's coming off a major injury. So, does that necessarily carry as much weight? Yes, he'd have a win over a guy that is a legend in professional wrestling, but that's like, Bray Wyatt or The Fiend going over Hulk Hogan at this point. They're guys that were major names in the industry that have gone to other companies like TNA and Impact and all of that and worked there and made a name for themselves outside of WWE and outside of WCW, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate as a meaningful win in 2020.
Right.
Like I said, I think we probably will see Sting in, some capacity in AEW, just because he's been very much kind of like Jericho, where he's going to go wherever he wants to go and do what he wants to do. And he's kind of like a maverick.
Right.
But, you know, I just hope that it's not at the expense of guys like Darby Allin, guys like Scorpio Sky, all of those good young talent that they have losing spots.
Right. And obviously Sting's Crow character, a lot of people can make the comparison to Darby Allin's character. So obviously with the face paint, not talking as much. So it'd be an interesting storyline if that's where they go with it. But,
right.
You know, you brought up Brodie Lee earlier as a guy that's now challenging for the AEW Championship. And when he came to AEW, he became the Exalted One of the Dark Order. And a lot of people at first said that it was a parody of Vince McMahon. And the first couple of video packages, you could say that was the case. In fact, he talked about it on Busted Open Radio and said that any parody of Vince McMahon was not intentional. He has no reason to hate WWE, has no reason to hate Vince McMahon. And in fact, the character of Mr. Brodie Lee is more of a ode to mafia movies. He likes those kind of characters, so he portrayed the Exalted One as like a mob boss. So do you believe Brodie Lee when he says that Mr. Brodie Lee is a mafia leader, not a parody of Vince McMahon?
Well, I think to a certain extent, people could probably make the make the argument that Vince McMahon is probably a little bit of a mob boss himself, the way he carries himself and some of the things he does. But all kidding aside, I think that, you know, I think there's some truth to what he's saying. I mean, when you think back to some of the things that were talked about regarding the Dark Order, them being a really big organization, it's much larger than people actually know. And you know, I think that there's some truth to that, but I got to think that a lot of the subtle things that they did do in those promotional videos at first, including Brodie Lee, were subtle shots at Vince McMahon, or maybe even not that subtle, because, you know, for people who are close to Vince McMahon, they were certainly the people that were calling out those things and pointing them out, not necessarily the fans. And the fans were saying it as well, but the people that were close to Vince McMahon within the industry also brought that stuff to light, saying, oh, you know, this is obviously a shot at Vince McMahon. It's a parody of Vince McMahon. So to a certain extent, I think he's telling the truth that he wants to portray more or less a mob boss. Mm-hmm. And I think they're doing that now because they've kind of toned it down. But I think at first those promos and the video packages that were put together clearly were trying to take some subtle shots at Vince McMahon to a certain extent.
Right. Like the line that he gave Christopher Daniels when he debuted, you know, you're not the first out of touch old man that
exactly,
you know, that might've been a shot at Vince McMahon. And that's an obvious one. Then there was the whole sneezing one, which some people obviously made the connection that's Vince McMahon. Some made it, you know, this was right during the beginning of the pandemic. So some could just say, you know what, he's sneezing without covering his mouth and hates the fact that someone sneezes without covering their mouth when there's a whole pandemic going on. Then there's the whole Preston Vance 10 character, which he recruited a former football star. Like Vince McMahon loves to push the former football guy. So there's definitely the parallels. Do I think it's a Vince McMahon parody? I don't. I think there's coincidence of Vince McMahon's character, but I do not see it as a Vince McMahon parody. I think you can really do a lot more if it's a Vince McMahon parody. And as you said, they've toned that down. And the way that Brodie Lee carries himself in the ring with his suits, I definitely see more mob boss than Vince McMahon. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Especially now.
Yeah. I mean, they're not really doing hits on people like the mafia would. They're not organized crime like the mafia is, but maybe things will develop as it's more of a mob. Or, I mean, it's a cult. Let's put it that way. It's a cult, not a mob or a mafia, but maybe it eventually evolves into something like that. So only time will tell. But on this weekend, Double or Nothing's happening, and Brodie Lee is facing the AEW champion, Jon Moxley, who recently had some interviews and spoke highly, believe it or not, of WWE. You know, this time last year, he had the interview with Chris Jericho where he was very frustrated with the company and talking about his frustrations and all the good shit stuff that Vince McMahon would say. However, had a little different tone recently. He spoke with Fightful.com talking about WrestleMania 36, said he watched the whole thing both nights and enjoyed it. He really liked the Boneyard match. And then he also talked to Sports Illustrated and said this: "It's through my own doing by being so vocal about the things I was frustrated about, but I hope I didn't go overboard that people forget all the good stuff. I had a pretty good freaking run there, and that Money in the Bank in 2016 was incredible. More than anything, that was a sense of relief. I came so close so many times, rolling the boulder to the top hill, only to have it roll all the way back down. It made so many promises to fans that I didn't follow through or by failing to win the title. So when I was sitting in the ring as champ, a weight finally lifted off my shoulders. It was all about peaking stories at the time. You didn't want to miss a moment because you waited too long. It was tough to call me winning that, and that was perfect scenario." So do you think now, a year later, Moxley not necessarily regrets what he said on Talk is Jericho, because obviously he was frustrated at the time, but a year later, time has healed all wounds, it seems like. So is he trying to just cover up that, you know what, it wasn't all that bad in WWE? Or is this him finally realizing, hey, it wasn't all that bad in WWE?
So when I first read his comments, I wasn't necessarily surprised by what he was saying. And the reason I say that is this: I'm sure you can think back to either like a breakup you were really upset about at first, or like a job you left that you really thought you hated, and now you can look back on it. When people leave a certain situation or a particular, organization like WWE, and now they've gone on to another organization or found themselves in a different situation, and now they find themselves happier or successful. Now you can reflect back on that time that you thought was really negative and really bad and kind of look at some of the better things. CM Punk did that. He obviously left under very similar circumstances to Moxley, just in the sense that he was obviously frustrated with what was going on with him in WWE, from booking and injuries and everything else in between. Punk went on to have a career in the UFC. He does commentary now. He's in a good place and he's comfortable in his life. Moxley right now, he's found success outside of WWE, both in AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, Jericho, the same thing. So I think all these guys being in WWE, being in an industry that's so grueling, you're on the road, you're frustrated, you're hurt, you're tired, you got to train, you got cameras in your face. It's not, there are some downsides to all of that. It takes a toll on you. And I think that these guys, once they leave all of that stuff, I mean, you got to imagine they can probably talk to their wife. You can talk, or your friends, maybe to your family to a certain extent. But it's not like they can go out while they're under contract with the WWE and just say these things and not face repercussions. So having all that bottled up for all this time, once they're let go of their contract, it's like it all comes out. Creative sucks. I was hurt. Nobody listened to me. Vince McMahon this, Vince McMahon that.
Right.
Now, a year later, months later, however long it takes, they can reflect back on their time there and be like, yeah, you know what, there's ups and downs, just like anywhere else in any other job. And, these were the negatives, but he did have a good run. Jericho did have a good run. Punk did have a good run.
Right. And that's the thing. Like you listen to all these Talk is Jericho interviews with all these WWE releases after the fact, and they go to AEW or rumored to be going to AEW. Matt Hardy, Brodie Lee, The Revolt, Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley was the one that, let the gloves out or dropped the gloves and threw every punch at WWE, basically saying they suck. They did nothing right. Everyone else, when you listen to their interviews, it was like, no, I had a great run. Brodie Lee said, you know what? There were some bad parts. There were things I didn't like, but eventually there were some good things too. The Revolt, same thing. Matt Hardy, same thing. Moxley, because it was so new, he was the one that just said, F this. I'm just going to let everybody know Vince McMahon does not know what he's talking about. He's out of touch. But here we are a year later, and it's like, you think about it. 2016 was a good year for Jon Moxley, Dean Ambrose, whatever you want to call him. But at the end of his run in WWE, it wasn't. So like you said, there's ups and there's downs. And right now he has a great run in AEW, being the AEW champion, yet to be pinned or submitted. So, that's something to take into consideration, how much bigger it could have been if they just pushed him more in WWE. And for whatever reason it is, they just didn't push him the way he's been pushed now as Jon Moxley. So that's how I see it. And maybe that's what he's reflecting on. Like, there was a part in 2016, maybe they could have pushed him a little better. But at the same time, that's just not how it was. He got his WWE championship run, but then after that, that's it. But like you said, or like he said, there's ups and there's downs with everything that happened in WWE. So maybe this is him trying to rebuild a bridge for if that time comes where his contract ends in AEW, he's keeping his options open for WWE. That's how I see it. So let us know in the comments what you guys think. Where does Drew Gulak go after his contract ending in WWE? Does Sting end up in AEW? And what do you think of the comments made by both Brodie Lee and Jon Moxley? Don't forget to share us all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, SCPB Podcast. And for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti. Thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.